Hello, Ivo. I don't know how many years it has been.
Maybe more than 10, 12, I would say.
Much more.
Much more, do you think so? It was the beginning of this century, maybe the beginning of this century.
Yes.
When we had a dinner in a fashionable restaurant in Poznań, as far as I get, right. I remember.
Yes.
So you created a fantastic academic career, as I have seen.
No.
In a way, right.
It's coming to its end in a couple of years.
It's too early to finish.
No.
Okay.
I don't regret.
It's a pleasure to meet you again.
Yes, it's great pleasure. Krysiu, a czy Tomasz będzie dzisiaj?
No, Tomasz będzie, tylko chyba ma problemy z połączeniem, ponieważ dzwonił, telefonicznie się łączył z Agatą Firlej i teraz Agata zniknęła.
Już się wynurzyła, dzień dobry.
Już jest. A dziekan?
Dziekan już się łączy też, bo nie udawało mi się przez ten kanał na zespole naszym, ale przez link wejdzie zaraz, także powinien się pojawić. Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello. A dobry dzień, pani docentko.
Dobry dzień, good morning.
Good morning. A jeszcze pan doktor Januszka jest tady z nami. Dobry dzień, cieszy mnie.
It's 10 hours.
In case of any emergency, I have phone quite close to me. And Professor Gawarecka also has problems with entering, so I will tell her what to do.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Dzień dobry. O, i jest dziekan z nami. Czy słyszysz nas, Tomku?
Tak, yes, I do. Hello, dzień dobry. Good morning.
Good morning.
Dzień dobry.
Dobry.
Dobrý den, paní docentko Alice Jedličková. Už jsme se dlouho neviděli, že?
Dobrý den.
Máme ten panel odpoledne, tak jsem rád, že se zase vidíme po několika dnech, že? Tak jo, zdravím.
Taky zdravím.
Okay, is it Agata who's deciding where we will start? Yes, Agata?
I thought that maybe Chair Professor Mizerkiewicz will decide about starting. So I think we are almost we are all here. So and Professor Witkowski also is with us. So we can start, I guess.
Okay. Because I was thinking that I am under remote control from you. So this is why I was waiting for some signal for you, SMS or something. So thank you. Okay, dear distinguished scholar, dear guest, our great Vice-Rector of the university, dear friends and colleagues, I am very privileged to ask Mr. Vice-Rector of Mickiewicz University, Professor Rafał Witkowski, to open our today's seminar and address few words to all participants of this first conference arranged by Epicur, which is European University, the idea that we are developing with our friends around Europe and inviting all of our friends and participants in other projects to this kind of collaboration. Yes, Professor Witkowski, the audience is yours.
Mr. Dean, Tomasz, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guests and friends, let me say a few words, although I am a little bit confused because I should switch to Slavic languages. This is the conference of the expert in Slavic languages. So why am I supposed to speak in English? That's the question that I ask myself. Maybe it's better to switch to the pan-Slavic language, because if I say dzień dobry or dober dan, everyone will understand what I have in mind. As you may remember, because you are excellent scholars, more than 100 years ago, when the Slavicists met in Prague in 1848, they taught each other in German. Now the renowned and prominent experts in Slavic linguistics and literatures meet virtually in Poznań, and we speak in English. This is the language in which we will communicate. The world changed, but there is something what is unchanged. This is our deep beloved towards the Slavic languages. I would like to explain you in few words the idea why we decided to organize the conference and why we invited the prominent scholars from Europe to discuss and to travel through the Slavic world. Mickiewicz University is a part of the alliance consortium of the European universities called Epicure, and together with the 7 other universities, 2 from Germany, 2 from France, 1 from the Netherlands, 1 from Greece, and 1 university from Austria, we decided to create something new in the history of the European education. This is called European University. We are the only Slavic university in this consortium, and therefore we feel a sort of obligation. This is our mission, to promote Slavic languages, to promote Slavic literatures within our consortium. In the intentions of directors, this week was designed to be the Epicure week in Poznań. We planned 2 years before, when we initiated the entire project, that all rectors and very many other scholars would have met in Poznań this week. And as you know very well, because of the pandemic situations, we were not able to hold these meetings in person. Last 3 days, we had several meetings online, practically from 9 in the morning up to 5 or 6 in the evening. We discussed everything what was related to the Epicure Alliance. And we intended to organize a scientific conference to end the Epicure Week in Poznań, to make stress what is important for us. When we internally with colleagues at the Mickiewicz University try to analyze what could be the best proposal of Poznań to promote science, to promote knowledge, to promote education for our Epicure colleagues, we decided that it should be the Slavic languages and Slavic literatures. There are 2 reasons. One, I already mentioned, we are the only Slavic university within our federation. But also the Poznań Institute of Slavic Studies or Slavic languages, philologies, is one of the best institutes within our university. And of course, as you know very well, for the Slavicists from Poznań University, they had a very good contact with the colleagues and friends from the entire Slavic world. Therefore, we would also like to take a chance not only to discuss what is new in academic debates, in scientific debates on the Slavic languages and literatures, but we will also like to invite you to think in which way we can promote the Slavic world within Epicure Alliance in more deeper, more broader, and more profound way. Just to tell you that we here in Poznań, we prepared a number of courses on the Slavic languages together with our friends from other Epicure universities. We arranged the courses on the Southern Slavic languages. We promoted the Croatian language, and we'll start to give a course on the Czech languages. And of course, together with our friends from Freiburg and together with our friends from Strasbourg, we will also try to promote the Polish language. And of course, there is very many other actions which we can undertake together. So we feel our mission not only to promote Polish language, but basically to promote the Slavic languages and the Slavic world. So I will be very, very happy to join the round table today afternoon to discuss with the prominent scholars in which way we can efficiently do it. And I'm absolutely convinced that we should invite more Slavic scholars to the Epicure Federation, to the Epicure Cooperation, to include more and more elements of the Slavic world to our federation, because in that way we will be able to combine what is the best from the West and from the East, and also from the South and from the North of Europe. So we are very, very grateful to all of you who accepted our invitation, who are right now with us. We are very grateful to all of you who share with us your knowledge, your experiences, your ideas. We are very, very grateful to all of you who dedicated your very precious time to spend this day with us, because we hope that as a most important outcome of this conference, would be a more clear vision in which way the Slavic studies may have been promoted within the Epicure Alliance. And we certainly do not intend to do it alone. Therefore, we invited also the representatives of other Epicurean universities, because we still hope that one day we will be able to cooperate more closely, more efficiently, and for the prosperity of all Epicure, and not only Epicure universities. So on the behalf of Rector of Albert-Ludwigs-Universität University, Professor Bogumiła Kaniewska, I would like to welcome all of you virtually in Poznań. I do hope that we'll be able to meet in person maybe next year to continue the debates. Maybe we should think about this series of conferences. Maybe we should put the date of a Slavic conference in Poznań somewhere as a firm point in the calendar. I'm looking right now at the Dean Tomasz Mizerkiewicz. Maybe that's the good idea. And certainly you may expect also the follow-up of this conference when we will be able to publish, to print the papers which you delivered right now. So to conclude, I'm very happy we can meet today virtually, and I do hope that very soon we'll be able to meet in person in order to continue our joint travel through the Slavic world. And without further delay, I would say one word in Polish, which we will certainly understand, because you are all expert in Slavic languages. Dziękuję bardzo wszystkim za przyjęcie zaproszenia i bardzo się cieszę, że mogę z Państwem spędzić kilka chwil dzisiaj. Tomasz, the screen is yours. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. I was clapping my virtual hands because I think, dear Rector, that I must say to our friends and colleagues that we have our Vice-Rector with so open heart for our faculty, for our Slavic studies, and we always feel this great support. Thank you, Vice-Rector. And I must say that I think that Professor Witkowski has invented a new poetics of welcoming speech, because this is something exceptional. Every time you address your kind words to new conferences and other kind of official meetings, this is something that is not so formal and not so I would say typical. So thank you so much for being so kind, for being so open and so inventing and inspiring for all of us, Mr. Rector. Dear friends, today's meeting, maybe at the beginning it needs to remarks. First thing is concerning the kind of community that we created as a group of scholars meeting today. We have been thinking that there is a good opportunity to meet our good partners. Our partners that we have already had during our scientific works and educational work with our friends from Czech Republic, from Croatia, from Serbia, Bulgaria, and other countries, with our new friends from scientific communities, from universities of Epicur, from Strasbourg, from Mulhouse, from Freiburg, Amsterdam, and Austria, and Thessaloniki. So there was the general idea that we could meet, have some scientific meeting, discuss some important issues for all of us. The other remark would be about the title, Traveling Through Slavic Worlds. this is a kind of, fantasy conference, because we have to not travel, yes? And this is how we would like to spend our time traveling through Slavic words, but this traveling is kind of limited now. Maybe in the future, this conference would be like traveling conference, yes? So maybe next edition would be, for instance, in Strasbourg, next edition would be in Brno, maybe next edition would be in Zagreb, and so on, because this is the kind of idea that could be traveling idea around all our universities. So this is something to consider. Now we will begin a program. The program, as you could see, was divided into 3 sections, and the first part will be the methodological panel, which was projected like a kind of making general frame for some particular discussions in these 3 groups. After that, general discussion showing contemporary developments of Slavic studies in different parts of Europe. This is an important because we would like to share our experiences, our today's inspirations, maybe important traditions. And after that, the 3 groups of our conference with some particular subjects like traveling, like intercultural contacts, and experience in making Slavic studies around the world. And the final discussion panel would be about how to think about new forms of institutional development of Slavic studies in different places in Epicure, but maybe also beyond Epicure. But just thinking about how to develop institutionally our Slavic studies in Europe. I must add one more thing, that this Epicure project was the project invented by European Union, and we are very engaged in this project because we think that this is a kind of new form of integrating scientific and academic communities in Europe. So I think this is very good and great and important idea. We as Mickiewicz University, we as a Faculty of Polish and Classical Philology are very deeply and strongly connected to the idea of European Union and its values. So that's why we are engaged so much in this particular project. Now, I would like to start our panel discussion, and let me invite our dear guests and scholars. I would like to welcome Ms. Victoire Feuillebois, dear guests from Strasbourg University, on behalf of Professor Emilia Koustova. Welcome.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So thank you very much. I'm delighted to take part in this conference and to represent Strasbourg. So my name is Victoire Feuillebois. I am a specialist of Russian literature of the 19th century, and I will speak not really on the behalf of my colleague Emilia Koustova, but let's say with her blessing, and you will have the chance to meet her this afternoon. Emilia is an historian, a specialist of Soviet history, and she is also the head of our Department of Slavic Studies at Strasbourg University. So she asked me to make this presentation for you and to present the methodological issues that we have in Slavic studies in France.
Yeah. But dear Victoire, because I would like to present the guests at the beginning, all the guests. Yes.
Okay.
And after that we'll
so I'm not beginning. All right. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
And there would be a slight change in order, if you don't mind. Okay.
Okay.
And let me invite Dr. Heinrich Kirschbaum. Yes, I'm very delighted to Mr. Kirschbaum from Freiburg University. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Oh.
Tomku, pamiętasz?
Yeah. I was trying to be sure if we have a sound contact. Yes, it's okay. And now I would like to welcome Professor Ewa Kraskowska from our university, from our faculty.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be with you here today.
Okay, thank you. I would like to welcome Professor Ivo Pospíšil from Masaryk University, Brno. Welcome. Oh, you are mute. You are mute, Professor. We cannot hear you.
Sorry. I didn't want to disturb you. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you all, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. I would like to welcome Professor Vitkowicz from University of Zagreb. Welcome, Tvrtko.
Hello to everyone. Pleased to meet you all. And of course, thank you for your kind words, for invitation.
Okay, and welcome Professor Bogusław Zieliński from our university. Welcome, Professor. Okay. And there would be just a little change in order because of some important reason. Professor Zieliński asked us to be the first and to present his paper at the beginning. So there will be only just this one change. Yes, that Professor Zieliński will start, and then we will go just as the order in the program says. Okay. So Professor Zieliński's presentation, his speech has been distributed to all the participants, because Agata told me that if someone does not have a translation of this presentation, just let know Agata, and Agata will send it, or just attach it, yes, to our some link to our in our chat. So I would like ask Professor Bogusław Zieliński for his presentation about Slavic studies in the face of contemporary challenges, slawistyka wobec wyzwań współczesności. Yes? Okay. Professor Zieliński, the audience is yours.
Proszę Państwa, tytuł tego wystąpienia, który z rozmysłem wybrałem, wielokrotnie pojawia się w dyskursach naukowych, w debatach i wskazuje na pewne zagrożenie albo ułomność slawistyki. Slawistyka jakby wymagała pewnego wysiłku, szczególnej troski, aby sprostać nadchodzącym wyzwaniom. Te obawy, pojawiające się w formie mniej lub bardziej ukrytej, rodzą się także wewnątrz środowiska slawistycznego i wyraźnie różnią się od zmartwień, które dotykają filologów klasycznych. Przedstawiciele filologii klasycznej coraz częściej muszą przekonywać swych oponentów, że znaczenie filologii klasycznej i jej użyteczność nie powinna być pomniejszana we współczesnym świecie. Dylematy slawistów wiążą się z odmienną grupą problemów, mianowicie z definicyjnymi komplikacjami slawistyki i jej nieodległą historią, ale także konfrontacyjną antygenezą dyscypliny antygermańską i antyeuropejską. Status slawistyki wyróżniony w oparciu o kryterium językowe sprawia, że przedmiotem jej badania jest rzeczywistość językowa, kulturowa i społeczna najliczniejszej w Europie grupy ludności indoeuropejskiej na olbrzymim obszarze, od Odry po Ocean Spokojny. Definicyjne dylematy slawistyki przejawiają się w dwóch przeciwstawnych tendencjach w zakresie uprawiania dyscypliny i jej praktyki dydaktycznej. Z jednej strony widać tendencję do kontynuowania studiów slawistycznych uprawianych w ramach wąskich filologii narodowych, wychodząc niejako naprzeciw różnych separatyzmów, ale również z uwagi na restrykcje finansowe dotykające humanistykę w licznych państwach. Druga tendencja uprawiania slawistyki podyktowana jest paradygmatem użyteczności, a także pragmatyką globalizacji, i przejawia się we włączeniu slawistyki w obręb dyscyplin porównawczych, studiów kulturoznawczych, czy w ogóle w szersze ramy studiów regionalnych. W tym miejscu należy skonstatować oboczność występowania tradycyjnego terminu filologia słowiańska oraz nowszego, lecz bardziej ekspansywnego terminu slawistyka, który pojawia się jako nazwa dyscypliny, nazwa akademickich instytucji slawistycznych czy programy studiów. Termin slawistyka wskazuje na szerszy, głównie kulturowy kontekst uprawiania dyscypliny. Ta druga tendencja uprawiania slawistyki sytuuje tę dyscyplinę jako element opozycji, filologia i lub kulturoznawstwo. Często na korzyść tej drugiej, gdyż w opinii jej zwolenników poszerzy ona i umożliwi badanie i dydaktykę pogłębioną komparatystycznie i interdyscyplinarnie, otwierając jednocześnie slawistykę na dyscypliny pokrewne, historię filologii, socjologię filologii, psychologię filologii, oferując kompleksowy obraz tożsamości kulturowej danej filologii narodowej. W ścisłym związku z kwestią powyższą pozostają dwie przeplatające się dydaktyczno-naukowe praktyki. Pierwsza, intensywna, stosowana głównie na uniwersytetach zachodnioeuropejskich, skupia wszystkie języki literatury słowiańskie w jednolitą dyscyplinę, filologię słowiańską, dzieląc się na przykład na słowiańską mediewistykę, słowiańskie literaturoznawstwo, słowiańskie językoznawstwo. Tendencja druga, ekstensywna, praktykowana przeważnie w krajach słowiańskich, rygorystycznie koncentruje swoje zainteresowanie na kryterium narodowym. Także nie można już mówić o filologii słowiańskiej jako o jednolitej dyscyplinie, lecz o filologiach słowiańskich, wewnątrz których naukowcy specjalizują się w pojedynczych filologiach słowiańskich. W oczywisty sposób pojawia się tutaj jeszcze inna fundamentalna kwestia, a mianowicie kwestia zakresu pojęcia slawisty i jego związku z rozległością slawistycznych kompetencji badacza. O ile kryterium językowe slawistyki posiada swoje uzasadnienie w dyscyplinach językoznawczych, o tyle ono jest zawodne w zakresie literaturoznawstwa słowiańskiego. Jak nam doskonale bowiem wiadomo, na terenie Słowiańszczyzny spotykają się i krzyżują trzy wielkie kręgi cywilizacyjne. Cywilizacja bizantyjska, łacińska i cywilizacja islamu. Przy czym cywilizacja łacińska pojawia się w kilku odmiennych wariantach, z których podstawowymi są środkowoeuropejski i śródziemnomorski. Do tego należy jeszcze dodać różnice wyznaniowe, protestantyzm i katolicyzm, ale także różnice wynikające z historycznej przynależności, na przykład do Cesarstwa Habsburskiego czy Imperium Osmańskiego. Wynikające z tych przesłanek bariery kulturowe są wyższe od barier stwarzanych przez obcość językową. Ta okoliczność, jak i inne uprzednio wskazane kryteria, przemawiają za trójczłonowym statusem slawistyki lub wręcz trzema slawistykami, trzema dyscyplinami. Autor tych słów jest gorącym rzecznikiem takiego właśnie stanowiska. Wyróżniając slawistykę zachodnią, której obszarem macierzystym jest Europa Środkowa, slawistykę południową, obejmującą areał Półwyspu Bałkańskiego i jego obrzeży, oraz slawistykę wschodnią, której przedmiotem zainteresowań jest olbrzymi obszar od Bugu po Ocean Spokojny. W polskiej tradycji badawczej instytuty slawistyki zachodniej i slawistyki południowej funkcjonują wspólnie w tożsamych strukturach administracyjnych. Natomiast instytuty slawistyki wschodniej tworzą odrębne administracyjne struktury instytucjonalne. Teraz kilka słów o nas. W minionych 2 dekadach w Uniwersytecie imieniem Adama Mickiewicza w Poznaniu ukonstytuowała się szkoła badawcza nastawiona na kwestię wspólnotowego postrzegania w niekonfrontacyjnej perspektywie 4 Slawii. Slavia Latina, Slavia Ortodoksa, Slavia Islamika i Slavia Judaika. Badania te przysporzyły nam miano Poznańskiej Szkoły Slawistycznej i nawiązują one do modelowych rozróżnień Zwonka Kowacza, profesorskiego kolegi nas wszystkich i oczywiście Twrytka Wukowicza obecnego tutaj. Kowacza, który dokonał redefinicji teorii komparatystycznej Dioniza Dziuryszyna. Liczne publikacje naszych badaczy oraz tomy pokonferencyjne inspirowane hermeneutyką interkulturową upatrują w dialogu i komunikacji najbardziej istotnego elementu procesów literackich. Punkt ciężkości, przesuwając ku interkulturowej historii literatury i kontekstowi interkulturowemu. Specyfiką naszych badań jest refleksja nad transformacjami, aktualizacjami i redefinicjami południowosłowiańskich autowizerunków kulturowych w ujęciu modelowym, ich funkcjonalizacja i semantyka kluczowych idei etnokulturowych, uwzględniając przy tym relacje wobec południowosłowiańskiego otoczenia Europy Środkowej i Europy Zachodniej. Ale w zakres naszych badań wchodzi także refleksja zakresu nowożytnego literaturoznawstwa zachodniosłowiańskiego, przede wszystkim bohemistycznego, ukonstytuowanego w ramach myśli strukturalnej, hermeneutyczno-fenomenologicznej, tematologii, autobiografizmu oraz postmodernizmu czeskiego i południowosłowiańskiego. Współczesna slawistyka może skorzystać z możliwości, które oferują kulturoznawstwo i komparatystyka. Tendencje te zacierają granice między literaturoznawstwem a wiedzą o kulturze, ale oferują ożywcze otwarcie, głównie na problematykę o społecznej doniosłości. Zbyt radykalny zwrot ku kulturoznawstwu, czyli zerwanie z zakorzenieniem filologicznym, grozi zagubieniem przedmiotu badań i zatarciem tożsamości filologii. Ostrzega przed tym Karl Ehrmacher. Niemal wszystkie slawistyczne ośrodki slawistyki akademickiej w Polsce dokonały wyraźnego zbliżenia ku kulturoznawstwu. Niektóre z tych jednostek w Polsce dokonały nawet zmiany swojej nazwy z filologii słowiańskiej na slawistykę. Nasz ośrodek trwa przy tradycyjnej nazwie filologii słowiańskiej. Ale dokonaliśmy istotnego zwrotu ku kulturoznawstwu. W praktyce badawczej i dydaktycznej naszego ośrodka istotną rolę odgrywa komparatystyka. Komparatystyka nie tylko staje w opozycji wobec literaturoznawstwa narodowego, w tym slawistycznego, a źródła zbliżenia slawistyki i komparatystyki tkwią przede wszystkim w pragmatyzmie metodologicznym, w perspektywie interdyscyplinarnej, która realizuje dzieło humanistyki zaangażowanej. Pragmatyzm metodologiczny oznacza współudział różnych dyscyplin, metodologii, sposobów badań wspierających slawistykę i komparatystykę, gdyż pomocą służą tutaj imagologia, geopoetyka, studia genderowe, studia postkolonialne, studia etniczne, studia nad migracją i emigracją, studia nad obcością, studia nad mniejszościami i wiele innych nurtów współczesnej humanistyki. Interdyscyplinarna perspektywa obecna w refleksji zarówno slawistycznej, jak i komparatystycznej naszego ośrodka wynika z realizacji szeregu zakresu badań, specyfiki nazw, narzędzi i perspektyw odpowiadających złożoności i zróżnicowaniu otaczającego nas świata. Wracamy do tytułu. Odpowiedź na problem tytułowy nie może być jednoznaczna, gdyż przyszłość każdej dyscypliny zależy od licznych czynników, a tradycja nauki w danym kraju i w danym uniwersytecie, specyfika miejsca, sąsiedztwo może podsuwać różne rozwiązania. Sprostanie wyzwaniom przyszłości w opinii autora tych słów znajduje się w przestrzeni, którą określa tradycja dyscypliny oraz wybór pryncypiów badawczych, adekwatnych metod metodologicznych i skutecznej oraz użytecznej dydaktyki. Na koniec, jesteśmy wszyscy tego świadomi, że slawistyka nie może pozostawać w ramach swego europejskiego areału kulturowego, ale musi się otworzyć ku problemom globalnym i uniwersalnym. Dziękuję za uwagę.
Thank you so much, Professor Zieliński, for giving us such a broad perspective. I would stress this idea typical for our School of Studies from Institute from Slavic Philology. I mean, this hermeneutics of intercultural relations. This is important for identity of the Institute's research, but also this tradition of structural research. And maybe one of the things that will return during our discussion is this important moment, how far our Slavic philologies became part of cultural studies. Yes, is it just, you know, something that has swallowed all of us? Yes, or do we experience this the trend called return to philology? Yes, and how is it in each of our Slavic studies? This could be a good thing to consider. And maybe the final question is, how do you answer to the world literature studies, world literature perspective? Yes, and we know how much discussion is about this. Yes, if minor languages, minor literatures are having the same possibilities, yes, in the market of world literature and in the project of world literature studies. So thank you for these important questions, important remarks at the beginning of our panel. Now let me ask Dr. Victoire Feuillebois for the presentation on Slavic studies in France, and I must remind you that this is the presentation with the blessing of Professor Koustova. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much. So what I was just saying was that I took the idea of methodological issues of Slavic studies very seriously. I think it's very important. And the aim of this presentation is both to give a presentation of Slavic studies in France, because I believe it's very important to get to know each other and the specificities of Slavic studies in each country, but also to point some thorny issues that maybe you encounter, and maybe we can share experience about these thorny issues. So I would like to say that there are many ways of traveling through Slavic space and Slavic words when you are a French scholar and a French scholar in Slavic studies. I will highlight only 3 of them, namely travels between faculties, travels between languages, and travel between universities. So my first point that I am sure you experience is traveling between faculties, because as you may know, Slavic studies are mainly taught in faculties of languages, but it's not exactly what we do, because in the faculty of languages, we teach not languages, but civilization. Namely, we aim to give a general culture about the Slavic world to our students. Of course, we aim to give them a good level of language maintenance, of course, but the idea of civilization is the core of the study of our students. And it means teaching them language through civilization and civilization through languages. It means that most of our colleagues are specialists not of languages, but of civilization, what we call civilization. Emilia is a specialist of history, and I am a specialist of literature, and we are the only two with a permanent position at the department. But it means that it doesn't mean that this is all there is in Strasbourg about Slavic studies. Actually, we travel, and I mean travel really, because we are located in different places in Strasbourg. We often travel to different faculties where other specialists of Slavic studies teach to different audiences. There are, for example, many specialists in the Faculty of Historical Sciences, which is a kind of problem because we, with Emilia, specialize on the Russian space, but at the Faculty of Historical Sciences, they specialize on the Czech Republic and Poland. So we work apart, I mean, geographically, and we work on different geographic spaces. So that's sometimes a problem. The Institute of Political Sciences in Strasbourg, which was located very near our university, but it just moved like 2 kilometers away, also has a strong speciality in Slavic areas. But as I said, it just moved further from us. And there is also a strong department of comparative literature with a specialist of Russian literature and a specialist of Polish literature. But as you know, comparative literature means it is not their only interests, meaning they don't work only with us, but also with different faculties. So being a Slavic scholar means traveling between these faculties, organizing common groups of interest, organizing activities for our students, but students who are very different in their perspective in university. So this is the first methodological problem that we have in France. The second problem is that we need also to travel between languages. Of course, it is a great luck that we have a department with many different languages, but there is also a problem on the level of the institution, which requires methodological arrangements. Why? Because, as I said, the two persons with the permanent positions in the department are specialists of Russian area, and our bachelor is a bachelor of Russian studies. But we are very lucky because we teach, in general, 5 different Slavic languages in our department: Russian, Polish, Bulgarian, Serbian, and Czech. We used to have Slovak, but it closed up because we didn't have any students anymore. And maybe we will open a class of Ukrainian at some point. So we really focus on Slavic languages in general. But the problem is that the teachers that teach other Slavic languages, they don't have a permanent position, meaning they change every 2, 3, 4 years. And every time we have to find someone new. And it's very difficult to have a consistent pedagogy with such an institutional defect. However, we really try to maintain a balance between Russian and the other languages. For example, in our bachelor, we made a second Slavic language mandatory for all students. Namely, they have to choose between Serbian, Czech, Bulgarian, and Polish. And during their first and second year, they have a mandatory class about Slavic cultural areas, namely all countries except Russia, because they have also classes of Russian history. And we also try to compensate with other activities. For example, this year we organized 2 workshops in Serbian, a workshop about Serbian theater and a workshop about journalistic writing in Serbian. We also are very lucky at the University of Strasbourg because we have a literary prize, meaning we have a writer in residence for 2 months every year. This is a program on university level, but we try to put pressure on the university to have Slavic authors. So this fall, it will be the Serbian author Goran Petrovic. And next fall, meaning 2022, we are very lucky to have the Polish writer and Nobel Prize Olga Tokarczuk, who's coming to stay 2 months at Strasbourg, giving creative writing workshops for students and conference at the National University Library. So this is a great chance, a great luck, and this is also an instrument that we use to balance this discrepancy between languages, which is structural in our department. And lastly, being a Slavic scholar in France means traveling between universities. It's mandatory. I must say that Strasbourg is one of the oldest centers of Slavic studies in France. We just had our centenary 2 years ago. So it's as old as Paris, which is, of course, a great source of pride. The first professor at Strasbourg University was André Mazon, that you might know for his polemics with Roman Jakobson about the medieval text, The Tale of the Host of Igor. Then we had Lucien Ténière, a very renowned linguist, and Boris Ungebaum, whose works on Russian verse and versification we still use today. So there is a very, very long tradition of Slavic studies in Strasbourg. But of course, especially today, we cannot be contented with what we do only in Strasbourg, because it's a big university, but it's a small department of Slavic studies. So we have the opportunity of working in networks with other colleagues, and we use mainly 3 networks. One network in France, which is called GDR, Groupement de Recherche, which aims at structuring all Slavic studies departments in France. And it was founded 2 years ago, and the first study day of this group was in Strasbourg. And the second one, the second study day, the second conference, was a few days ago in Grenoble. So there is a strong focus on not having these meetings in Paris, because in Paris, of course, everyone knows there is Slavic studies in Paris, but to highlight all the different centers in France where Slavic studies are present. So this is our first network. It concerns only France. Then we have another network, which with our dear neighbors, Freiburg and Basel. It's a network called Epicur. Unfortunately, we didn't really use it. We actually had a plan to invite Heinrich in Strasbourg 2 years ago, but we had some kind of problem with a virus or something, so it was not possible. But I'm sure we will have other opportunities to have you in Strasbourg, Heinrich. I really hope so. And lastly, our last network is, of course, Epicure, with the problem that Russian studies as such are not, have a complicated place in the network, to say the least. But still, we are very happy to be part of this network. We really hope it will be an opportunity for our department to be more visible, to improve exchanges between universities in the network, and that we will have the opportunity to make our students benefit from this network as well. So these are the 3 main points I wanted to highlight. Meaning you see that Slavic studies in Strasbourg, in France in general, and I believe everywhere, and you probably have the same problem, have a problem of dissemination of, means they are very much apart from each other, and it means traveling, and it means that these networks, such as Epicure, as fundamental to work in network and have profitable experiences with our colleagues. So we are very pleased to be part of it. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I was looking for this virtual clapping my hands. Thank you, and Dr. Feuillebois, for this presentation, for all the information about how is it, yes, to create Slavic studies in France. And then very, very interesting remarks about networkings. Yes, I mean Slavic studies being as a project of network. of scientists. So this is very important and something to consider during our discussion. And Professor Kirschbaum has already been addressed by Victoire, but I think this is the moment to first to deeply apologize Professor Kirschbaum for naming him doctor at the beginning of the conference. Sorry for that, dear professor, and would like to ask you to give us your presentation, coming out of the scientific literariness, a raw induction and an Epicurean assemblage. Yes, yes, very, very intriguing title. So let us hear your ideas.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Dziękuję bardzo za zaproszenie i organizację naszego epikuryjskiego spotkania. I think I understood my role, my function today in a wrong way. Victoire was presenting the structures, the networks of Strasbourg Slavistic studies, and I prepared a paper about my own crisis of theory.
So this is perfect, yes, because we all shared this crisis with you. So please do not hesitate to present all that you prepared.
Thank you, because I can tell about the structures. Grzegorz Krajewski, my colleague, is here. He is teaching Polish and Serbian literatures and languages, more Russian and Belarusian and post-Soviet area. But today I wanted to speak about theory.
Yeah.
Theory is a phenomenon of fashion, phenomenon modi. It's interesting and fun in the sense of Nietzsche's joyful science, if this fashion is intellectual, aesthetic, a kind of discursive dandyism. It's more difficult if a particular fashion is linked to the institutional position of a particular discipline within the academic world, with its struggle for ranks and grants. And this academic world in turn interacts with the so-called world outside of the university, which through its political and journalistic discursive authorities imposes on us both the notion of relevance and the actual objects of research. In my view, our science has recently retreated too far from the Humboldtian principles of research freedom and has been subjected to this external influence, paying too much tribute to so-called society. In some cases, it has even begun to use and to be proud of its social role and power. For the last year, I have been studying almost exclusively Belarus, the Belarusian Revolution of 2020. And these studies have led me to consideration which may perhaps be of interest for other Slavic scholars as well. Recently, I was called to a panel at a conference. They wanted to talk about engagement during the Belarusian Revolution. And I have caught myself as a thought that this word, which is engagement, which is so important for the Anglo-Saxon human and social discourse, is poorly to translate into Belarusian and Russian. And that is and this word is not present in the internal discourse of today's Belarus. In other times, I would not have noticed it or would not have paid any attention to it. But after Belarus, I cannot do that anymore. To speak about engagement if this word doesn't exist in a Belarusian authentic discourse. There is a subjectivation movement going on in Belarus, and you cannot distinguish there between the raw and the substantial. What is happening has no finality. There is no even a name for what is happening there. Then, later, the name will appear, will idiomatized, will take root in school books. But for now, for this rawness and namelessness is cherished and meaningful. The name would set the totality and fatality. The paratextual branding of the name would turn everything to a text, into a story, into a narrative, would make it clear and easy to read. And what is happening in Belarus is not easy reading. Belarus is already being written, but not yet read. Why am I telling you this? I am not against importation of theories. The last time Slavic literary studies fully participated in theory transfer in the time of structuralism. Since then, we have been living with importation, and this is okay. Although the products of other theories are not particularly fresh, but these conserves retain some flavor too. We have not any others. Myself, operated with post-colonial studies for many years, but gradually my doubts grew. The problem with post-colonial studies is not just that they degrade literature to a medium of cultural processes. The problem is that these theories, like most new theories, deductive, didactic, and hermeneutic. We turn too quick everything to an object, into a ready-made and potentially explainable object. The main problem of our discipline, which it became in the day of positivism, and with all the repairs it still remains today, is our teleology. The very expectation of effectiveness is half the trouble. Worse is that we do not only expect this effectiveness from our research, but also impose it on the subjects of our questions, on the literature. It seems to me, after the experience of reading and misreading of Belarus, that what we really need is a new induction, indukcja, a new understanding of the successive subjectivity of a particular text or phenomenon. We need a revision of the rhetoric of our conclusions and summaries. We need more raw movement of thought. We love and read literature precisely because it's a language of wandering connotations, of self-ironically interwoven idiolects and idioms. And we love literature for its freedom, for its fearlessness. But we ourselves are afraid of connotations in our own scientific language, trying to distill terms to the denotations we need. We look at words in an instrumental way, and we look at our own thought as an only informative one. At the end of every sentence we write and think, we put a fat point. The times when we thought we had a special meta language, thank God, are passing. It's a moment for our discipline to make a coming out, to declare its own literariness, with its specific genre of scientific ceremonies, but our discipline is a literature too, in which not the result is important, but the very assembly of moving thought, the readiness for crisis, depressions, and digressions of diction. And lastly, in both recently, in both seminars and research, I have returned, not in only my seminars, I have returned to the successive close reading, word by word, line by line, very, very slowly, not knowing or watching what the next line would say. We once, me and my students, spent an entire semester reading an 8-line poem. Literature is above all an Epicurean pleasure, and this aesthetic and intellectual pleasure has to be stretched. We cannot talk about engagement without being engaged ourselves, in our case, engaged by literature. We have to confess that we are writers and that we are readers. Our subject speaks not from the laboratory clouds of knowledge, but from a room with bookcases on the walls, with a book in the hand, a notebook on his desk, a pencil on his teeth. We want less power, more small talk and enjoyment. All the more so because we do not need telescopes and microscopes, instruments and laboratories. Our only research apparatus is the articulatory one: lips, tongue, larynx, lungs. We have to speak with our own voice. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, dear Professor Kirschbaum, I didn't want to use my virtual clapping hands because you said such an important manifesto and so close to our hearts. At the moment, I was a bit afraid that the director Witkowski is listening to this manifesto, because we usually ask our authorities to give us more money for some appliances. But as you have said that we don't need a laboratory, that could be a bit more complicated. But anyway, 2 points of your presentation are so important for us. I mean the same problem. Yes, we experience here in Poland that corporationalization, yes, of our academic life is something that we have to overcome and struggle with. And now this theoretical issues very important in your speech. I must confess that here in Poland, and especially in Poznań, we had over last 10 years, big influence of the ideas that were revealed in your speech. I mean, the idea of return to philology. Yes, we've been reading The Power of Philology by Gumbrecht very closely, and this book is very important to us. And then we read and translated into Polish books by Rita Felski. I know that Tvrtko Vukovic has also supported such idea in Croatia. And with the same idea, yes, we have to just be engaged first in our literary text. So this is so important and so close to us. I think that Tvrtko would like to say something, but maybe the discussion would be after that. Tvrtko, yes, because you raised your hand.
No, I just I wanted to congratulate our colleague for his great speech. And I agree with you. Yeah, Rita Felski is important in regarding the thoughts we just heard. Yeah. So yeah, I prepared something close to what you just said about return to philology, and I'll refer to maybe to Deman text and to Gumbrecht text and to Werner Hammacher text and so on and so on. Yes, but okay. we will have time for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. And now I would like, as Professor Ewa Kraskowska, because as Professor Zieliński said, and it is sometimes like this, that we have, Slavic studies, and apart from this, we have Institute of Slavic Studies, but usually in Poland we have separated Institute of Polish Studies, yes, of Polish philology, because this is so huge. So huge unit that it is not a part of Slavic studies. This is another institution. So Professor Ewa Kraskowska is a professor from Institute of Polish Philology, and the title of presentation is The Tradition and the Present Day of Translation Studies at the Institute of Polish Philology in Poznań. Yes? Okay, Ewa.
Thank you, Tomasz. And let me once more express my great pleasure of being here with all of you. The topic of my presentation may seem to be quite narrow, but in fact, translation research is quite an important part, and used to be quite an important part within the Slavic studies during the whole second part of the 20th century. And my paper in a way relates also to the previous presentation by Heinrich Kirschbaum, especially when it comes to the problem of transferring theories from the Slavic area worldwide. So let me start with my paper. In contemporary scholarly works on translation studies, one often comes across the statement that the history of the discipline began during the late 1970s in Western Europe. For example, Susan Basnet, in the preface to the third edition of her popular compendium, writes, quote, "The 1980s was a decade of consolidation for the fledgling discipline known as translation studies. Having emerged onto the world stage in the late 1970s, the subject began to be taken seriously and was no longer seen as an unscientific field of inquiry of second importance. Throughout the 1980s, interest in the theory and practice of translation grew steadily. Then, in the 1990s, translation studies finally came into its own, for this proved to be the decade of its global expansion. Once perceived as a marginal activity, translation began to be seen as a fundamental act of human exchange. Today, interest in the field has never been stronger, and the study of translation is taking place alongside an increase in its practice all over the world. End of quotation. A similar view on the emergence of translation studies was taken, among others, by Theo Hermans or the late James Stratton Holmes, the author of the famous article, The Name and Nature of Translation Studies, published in 1972, which is considered to be the founding text of the discipline. All such opinions have been and still are formulated by, widely speaking, Western scholars. In their eyes, the breakthrough moment was the emergence of the so-called manipulist school and the descriptive translation studies paradigm, as opposed to the prescriptive paradigm. They completely ignore the fact that in the second half of the 20th century, translation scholarship developed very intensely in Slavic countries. The most notable achievements in this field must be credited to researchers from the Slavic world, to mention just Roman Jakobson, or researchers from Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, to be more precise, Wiktor Rosenzweig, Isaac Revzin, Kornej Czukowski, Żylewi, Anton Popovich, and Tartu School of Semiotics. This is only just a few names. This is one vivid example of how persistent the barriers separating the Slavic area from the international circulation in scholarship proved to be to this day. Today, in the field of translation studies, there is more interest worldwide in what is happening in non-Western countries, China, India, African countries, than in our part of Europe. Whereas, as the Italian translatologist and Slavist Lorenzo Constantino remarked in 2015, since the late 60s of the and this is a quotation, since the late 60s of the 20th century, much research has been carried out in the field of translation studies by structuralist literary theorists and historians in Poland. In particular, a group of scholars of the Institute of Polish Philology from the University of Poznań, such as Jerzy Ziomek, Edward Balcerzan, Stanisław Barańczak, Anna Legerzyńska, Ewa Kraskowska, the Poznań School, produced a kind of theoretical and descriptive research work which was characterized by an analytical approach definable as source and target oriented, micro and macro structural at the same time. Although the results emerged were often of considerable interest and ahead of comparable studies carried out in the West at the same time, little is known about Poznań School in the West. End of quotation. Having this in mind, I have recently been taking every opportunity to remind academic world of our Poznań School, so let me also do this today. I will present the research carried out by its members in such a way as to highlight its precursory nature in relation to what today functions under the international name of translation studies. An important aspect of this research is its continuity over more than half a century. Successive generations of researchers have taken over the relay baton from their predecessors and teachers, adding ever more recent achievements to their output. And now I would like to share my presentation with you. I hope I managed to do this. And tradition and the present day. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Yes.
Moment. It all started with Professor Jerzy Ziomek, an eminent expert in Old Polish literature, in his youth a fervent Marxist, who at the beginning of the 1960s founded the Theory of Literature department at the Poznań Institute of Polish Philology. He abandoned his Marxist approach quite early and became one of the main representatives of Polish structuralism and semiotics, and the members of his team followed his trend with him. He had broad and varied research interest, from the works of the early Renaissance writer Mikołaj Rej, through avant-garde theater and drama to translation issues. Among his translatological works, it is worth noting the 1965 study devoted to Leopold Staff's Polish translations of the Latin poems of the Renaissance poet Jan Kochanowski. In it, Ziomek applied mathematical algorithms to the comparative stylometric study of Kochanowski's original poems and their translations. Today, such analyses are carried out with the help of special computer tools, and stylometry has become a fashionable research method. Ziomek's proposal in those days was isolated and did not find a continuation, but it is certainly worth remembering. The real founder and pillar of our School of Translatology, however, was Ziomek's younger colleague, Edward Balcerza, now our senior professor. It was he who laid the theoretical foundation for our research in the 1960s, especially in his 1968 article, The Poetics of Creative Translation. Creative rather than poetic, even though much of the material quoted in this article comes from the world of poetry. Creative because it refers to that which is most important, the mysteries of artistic processes. Balcerza postulated that the theoretical study of translation, especially the analysis of the poetics of translation, should have its own tools, its own system of concepts, and its own terminology. The concepts and terms he proposed then, such as, for example, translation series, are still used today. Here you have some covers of his books on translation. His research into bilingual literary works was equally pioneering, and in the 1970s he edited, in collaboration with Anna Legierzyńska, at that time his doctoral student, the anthology Polish Writers on the Art of Translation 1440-1970. The second edition of this anthology, prepared together with another of his doctoral students, Ewa Rajewska, now our university professor, covered the years 1440-2005. For the Poznań School, this was the beginning of translator studies, a branch of translation studies which is now being vigorously developed all over the world and is considered a novelty within the discipline. Thanks to Balcerza, translation studies have become a permanent element of literary studies at our Institute of Polish Philology. If Edward Balcerza remains the most distinguished and recognizable academic representative of Poznań's translatology circle, its most celebrated literary one was undoubtedly Stanisław Barańczak, whose poetry and art of translation have earned him an international reputation. In the latter half of the 1960s, when Ziomek and Balcerza's works had already paved the way for translation research within the field of literary studies in Poznań, Barańczak was studying Polish literature and Polish literature under the guidance of the two scholars, making his debut as a poet and member of the group, which the history of Polish post-war literature labeled as Nowa Fala, the new wave. He was simply a linguistic magician and genius. With the time, his creativity developed to reach the highest level of poetic form with regular and complex rhythm and rhyme, as well as rich phonic structure. Simultaneously, Barańczak evolved as a translator, and the trajectory of his progress in this field was similar, since he started translating poetry as a labor of love in his early years at university. He commenced with lyrics of songs by the Beatles and soon moved to translating English metaphysical poetry. After some time, he proceeded to Shakespeare and the whole English poetry canon. He also occasionally translated from Russian and German. The political turmoil of the 1970s and 1980s in Poland had a considerable impact on Barańczak's career as a poet, translator, and academic. Engaged in the political anti-communist opposition, Barańczak became one of the most prominent Polish dissenters in the latter half of the 1970s, which resulted in his expulsion from the university. He was reinstated to his academic position in 1980 during the short period of the Solidarity movement. In 1981, Barańczak was offered the position of Chair of Polish Language and Literature in the Slavic department at Harvard University. Harvard turned out to be a perfect environment for his extraordinary talents and a springboard for his international career as a translator. Over the following decades, he both continued supplementing the canon of Polish translations of English poetry, representing different epochs, and, in cooperation with his native English-speaking friends, started translating Polish poetry into English. This culminated in an achievement of particular artistic excellence and cultural significance, the English translation of Polish literary masterpiece Laments, Treny by Jan Kochanowski, done by Barańczak and the Irish Nobel Prize winner Seamus Heaney. As a translation scholar, he published only a few works, but they are still cited and available also in English. Perhaps the best known is this manifesto, mały lecz maksymalistyczny manifest translatologiczny, albo tłumaczenie się z tego, że tłumaczy się wiersze również w celu wytłumaczenia innym tłumaczom, iż dla większości tłumaczeń wierszy nie ma wytłumaczenia, titled in Barańczak's characteristic way with a complicated pun. Any attempt to translate this title into English must have ended in failure. The next generation is in the Poznań School of Translatology is represented mainly of two names. I missed a slide about Anna Legerzyńska. That's a Freudian slip, by the way. Anyway, the next generation in the Poznań School of Translatology is represented mainly of two names, Anna Legerzyńska and Ewa Kraskowska, that is the speaker of these words. Under Balcerzan's supervision, Legerzyńska wrote a doctoral dissertation entitled The Translator and His Authorial Competence on the Material of Post-War Translations of the Poetry of Alexander Pushkin, Vladimir Mayakovsky, Ivan Krylov, and Alexander Blok. And it is a model example of how descriptive translation studies should be conducted and convincing argument that the translator is a second author. Kraskowska followed up on Balcerzan's study of creative bilingualism with a doctoral dissertation on the work of Stefan Temerson, a Polish writer who lived in London since World War II and wrote in Polish and in English. This dissertation was prepared under the supervision of Jerzy Ziomek. Both works are clearly situated within the descriptive cultural research of translation, although their authors, Anna and I, had no idea at the time that such a tendency had emerged in Western translation studies. In the decades that followed, our younger colleague, Ewa Rajewska, a student of Balcerzan and Kraskowska, continued the research on translators, publishing the results in 2 monographs, one on Barańczak, poet, Stanisław Barańczak, poet and translator, and the second one about original and translation works of Ludmiła Mariańska. In the 21st century, we have succeeded in creating a translation module for MA studies in Polish philology. We educate, this is the screen of our website. We educate future researchers of translation, and an important part of the curriculum is a project that involves collaborative translation of English books in the humanities. Among our youngest colleagues, graduates of this translation studies module is, among others, Aleksandra Wieczorkiewicz, who already published her book on Bolesław Leśmian poetry translated into English, and he also translated Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. And when it comes to these projects in collaborative translation of English academic books, here are our titles. These the outcomes of these projects are always published. So as you can see, we do not satisfy ourselves with minor names and scholars, but we always try to introduce some important books into our work. So it's David Damrosch, Mike Ball, Elaine Showalter, the 2 books by Elaine Showalter, Faculty Towers and Sexual Anarchy are the first books of this famous feminist scholar translated into Polish. And Rita Felski, Uses of Literature, which was already mentioned here a couple of minutes ago. Already 3 of our graduates have received their PhD degrees, and more doctorates are in progress. So, as you can see, the Poznań School of Translatorology will live. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Ewa. I think it was a good case study, yes, where we could give an example of some methodological initiative taken and realized in one of Slavic universities that had such a strange reception, because in some Slavic departments, in some Slavic universities, we had some reception, yes, of Balcerzan's works, but there wasn't such any important reception in the Western universities. So this is a good a case, yes, for this describing the situation of Slavic studies and their role in the methodological, yes, discussion of contemporary theories. Well, maybe the next step will be given in this, or maybe another direction, by Professor Ivo Pospíšil from Masaryk University, Brno. The title of the presentation, The Slavonic Studies at the Crossroads, Redefining or preserving. Professor Ivo Pospíšil, yes? Please.
Thank you very much, dear university representatives, colleagues and friends. Thanks for the invitation. I accept it with pleasure, also with reference to my past and partly present context with some Poznań Slavists, sometimes current topical, sometimes fading away. In the very beginning, I would like to return to the initial Professor Witkowski's clever words mentioning his astonishment or amazement. The communication among European Slavists will be realized in English. En passant, he also mentioned German, which served as a common tool of mutual understanding in the past. Moreover, I would like to mention, beside the Prague Linguistic Circle and referring to the memorable event from Polish literary or, in a wider sense, cultural history, Adam Mickiewicz's Paris lecture delivered at Collège de France in French, with a famous romantic poet self-critically complained of his imperfect knowledge of this language, though I'm convinced when reading his lectures he was too modest in this sense. I don't think we, the participants of this meeting, could think out something brand new or absolutely original. It is not the quality of our rather speculative scholarly disciplines in which it's possible to come just to the shifts of emphasis. If we are succeeded in this, I think our conference fulfilled its mission or role. When in the mid-1990s I tried to constitute a newly founded Institute of Slavonic Studies at Masaryk University, Brno, I could naturally continue a rich tradition of Slavonic studies in this city under the label the Slavonic Seminar, headed by Professor Jiří Horák, a famous specialist in comparative Slavonic literatures and a later ethnologist and folklorist. Much later, Czechoslovakia's ambassador to Moscow after 1945, the Russian emigrant of Polish and Ukrainian origin who came to Brno from Bulgaria, invited by two Czech professors of Czech literature, Sergei Vilinsky, then Roman Jakobson, Jiří Horák, Frank Volman, Bohuslav Havránek, majority of them later or earlier the members of the Prague Linguistic Circle, accompanied by other historians of literature from the sphere of Romance, Germanic, and English studies. For example, Otakar Levy, father of Jiří Levy, a famous specialist in translatology or theory of translation, František Chudoba, Karel Štěpáník, Václav Černý, who taught at one of the Brno grammar schools before coming to Charles University to occupy chair of comparative studies. Just a moment. I think I'd like to share some very concise presentation. Can you see this, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. By the way, just a moment. If we return to the interwar period in former Czechoslovakia,
Professor, the presentation disappeared.
Disappeared. Yes, I thought so. Excuse me. That's the problem. That's the problem. Never mind. I will show it later on, right? I will show it later on. I may comment upon it. Excuse me. If we return to the interwar period in former Czechoslovakia, we have to admit that there were two main streams in literary scholarship. Besides the later famous Prague linguistic circle, it was the Society of History, represented by the supporters of traditional methods such as positivism, Geisteswissenschaft, literary psychology, School of Cultural History, and so on. The members of the Prague linguistic circle who committed sins against Jakobson's methodology of synchronous functional approaches, for example, a literary historian Jan Wojciech Sedlák or Miloš Weingart, who was one of the founding members of the circle, lost their membership either partly voluntarily, partly were expelled. The strict attitude toward the so-called loyalty to methodology were also typical of the Slovak literary comparatives mentioned, for example, in the paper by Professor Želinsky, Dionys Durishin. I repeated the cases of possible methodological clashes not accidentally, because these conflicts represent a famous dilemma between liberal and dogmatic way of the formation of literary criticism as such. Without a strict approach up to the expulsion of a sinner from scholarly societies, there is no progress, as literary methods sometimes need extreme approaches. Otherwise, they are not capable to bring new, innovative results. On the other hand, a certain drop of tolerance and conciliation is a necessary condition of mutual cooperation of the scholars of various ideas and temperaments. Literary criticism, or more academically, scholarship, has been going through several crises, and this fact concerned also Slavonic studies as such. The crisis of the so-called unity of Slavonic literatures, because Slavonic languages represent an indisputable unity which can be very easily proved, while literatures do not represent such a strong and tightly bound entity. The crisis of comparative literary studies has been going on since the 1950s, starting with René Velek's famous Chapel Hill lecture, up to the contemporary orientation of comparative studies on cultural studies, not literatures, but literary cultures. In this sense, I've always argued with the whole concept of the generally accepted and admired John Neubauer and Marcel Cornish-Pope's project, History of the Literary Cultures of East Central Europe, Junctures and Disjunctures in the 19th and 20th centuries, with their word groups, literary cultures, as well as East Central Europe, a literary translation from German Ostmitteleuropa, which since the times of Friedrich Naumann's book Das Mitteleuropa, going back to 1915, has been bearing an indisputable ideological burden, dividing the organic unity of Central Europe into two axiologically unequal halves. I've always appreciated Durishin's revision and even radical transformation up to the disappearance of traditional comparative literary studies through interliterary communities and interliterariness and interliterary centrisms. How to solve such a dilemma? I try to widen the traditional concept of Slavonic studies in the sphere both of linguistics and literary criticism by the concept of area studies, or strictly speaking, philological area studies based on the kernel of traditional philology, transcending towards the research of a certain cultural and geopolitical area, for example, the Balkans, Central Europe, East Europe, West Europe, the Mediterranean, and so on, with the help of history, ethnology, and folklore studies, sociology, social psychology, and so on. I met with a clear disagreement up to the end of the 20th century when my former opponents declared the concept their own invention. At the very moment, I became a strong opponent of the mechanically conceived area studies in which philological kernel completely disappeared, or there is a threat of its disappearance. It had its consequences also in the educational practice. It's very easy to repeat the political and politological phrases, then to learn new words, to read hundreds of books, and mainly to think. Thinking aches, said our first president at the eve of the birth of the Czechoslovak Republic, and a specialist in aesthetics, literary criticism, sociology, history of philosophy, Tomasz Masaryk. This is valid also in the contemporary situation of Slavonic studies. Each science or scholarship speaking about humanities starts with a definition of the object of its research. In the case of Slavonic studies, it's the complex notion sometimes called the Slavonic world. This term was used also in one of the papers today. In connection with the contemporary relevance of area studies, this term best corresponds to the complex investigation of the Slavonic phenomenon as such. So the first dilemma concerns the real existence of the unity of the object of Slavonic studies, the Slavonic world. Does it really exist? Do the Slavonic languages and Slavonic literatures really exist as a special entity differentiating from the other language literature entities? Is it real and truthful to speak about the Romance and Germanic entities? In this context, the entity of Slavonic languages and literatures, as well as the complex of the so-called Slavonic world, are the crucial starting point. The strict definition of the object of any scholarly discipline is closely linked with the definition of its borders. The contemporary state of things manifests more or less rather the dispersion and vagueness, indistinctness, blurriness, unclearness, nebulosity, the experience for several decades prevailing postmodernist concept of thought consisting in ambiguity, ambivalence, uncertainty, defocusing, the disappearance of the borders in the past clearly defined scholarly disciplines. If the concept of any science or scholarship is unclear, also the results of the investigation can be to a greater extent unclear, moving to zero. The pretext for an incredibly wide concept of scholarly disciplines without borders or boundary sans rivage, without bounds, was associated with a complicated object of research, but as I think the main reason for that was the repeated rejection of a more exact attitude towards humanities. The history of humanities in general and philology in particular manifested the eternal clash between a more exact approach and those approaches preferring the impressionistic, approximate, vague concept of the scientific object corresponding to essayism, artistic ambitions, and so on. This clash was taking place throughout the whole 20th century, expressed by the conflict between immanent, autonomous methods like formism, formalism, structuralism, and so on the one hand, and various kinds of Geisteswissenschaft, psychological approaches, receptionist, hermeneutical concepts, area and culture studies, and so on. Strictly speaking, it could be explicated by Roman Jakobson, interval professor of Masaryk University in Brno, by the term literariness, as an expression of the specificity of belles lettres, in contrast to the boundless, limitless conception of literature fully integrated in a too wide object like culture or cultural studies, geopolitical areas, and so on. The conception of area philological studies transcending the barriers of pure philology towards a wider concept cannot, however, mean the total dispersion or dissolution of the discipline based on the firm, lasting philological foundations. The old and eternal dispute between the defenders or advocates of the Slavonic unity and its opponents does not mean the irreconcilable conflict, but rather the expression of relativeness of these phenomena. The Brno and Prague comparatist Frank Wollmann, born 1888, died 1969, who very often argued with the German and Polish Slavists on the subject of the existence of the term Slavonic literatures, came to the conclusions in several of his books, including Literature of the Slavs, going back to 1928, reedited in Czech 2012 and translated into German and published by Peter Lang Verlag in 2003, and the Slavisms and Anti-Slavisms in the Spring of Nations, published in 1968, they really manifest the notion of Slavonic literatures as relative. There are the waves of unity and the waves of disintegration. The strongest argument of the consistency of Slavonic literatures while the affinity of Slavonic languages, of course, as I had said, is indisputable, is the morphological nearness, closeness, besides ideology or politics. The terms and their consistency are, of course, also of subjective quality. For example, the so-called unity of Slavonic literatures is not only a natural phenomenon based on the nearness of language material, also the geographical closeness sometimes, but also on the subjective concept very often of ideological and political background, for example, in the framework of national revivals in the 19th century and so on. Frank Wollmann deals with it in his really above-mentioned book Slavisms and Anti-Slavism in the Spring of Nations, analyzing more or less the period of and after 1848. The whole problem is also linked with the attempts at the revival of the new form of philological unity as such. I prepared such a panel for one of the Slovak literary journals in which I tried to comment upon this problem, and of course there were several colleagues who participated in this panel and tried to explain the position of the so-called new philology nowadays. It's of course very disputable. As a Czech philosopher and specialist in the Russian avant-garde, Zdeněk Mathauser put it, if Slavisms are common Slavonic qualities, topoi or loci communes, there is no need to reject them, as they could contribute to a better and more profound understanding and grasping of the object of the research. If they are not, it's in vain to artificially construct the general Slavisms. The opposition anti-Slavisms are a constant accompanying phenomena in the Slavonic world, demonstrating the intrinsic discrepancy or contradictory character of the Slavonic world as such. The natural part of Slavonic studies must be not only the famous Slavonic mutuality, the term vzájemnost, zájemność borrowed by Jan Kolar from Polish, and having a constant place in all Slavonic concepts, but also immutuality or unmutuality. Just the opposite plays a significant role in the Slavonic world and inter-Slavonic relations. I've shown in several case studies and books, incidentally, of the example of the very complicated, for example, Czech-Slovak bonds, but it's also possible to investigate it on the example of Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, Russian, Czech recently, and so on. So the future perspective of Slavonic studies might be connected with two only seemingly contrasting aspects. The relatively constant entity of the subject, that's the Slavonic phenomenon or the Slavonic world as the marking or delimiting the boundaries of Slavonic studies as an independent or autonomous discipline. And second, the Slavonic studies as an open or semi-open discipline in the philological framework or dynamic borders and transcending towards the cultural area concept, but not losing its philological kernel and starting point. All this presupposes the permanent process of transcending and at the same time delimiting the scholarly discipline called Slavonic studies in the process of the cognition of its subject and taking into account the intrinsic heterogeneity of its structure, language, literature, culture, history, society, ethnicity, and mentality. But this is not all. It's inevitable to speak about often the tabooing problem of the power in science. Everywhere and also in the academic environment there is a clash of meanings, opinions supported by various ideologies which should be rooted in scientific, rational arguments, mutual decentness and tolerance. Especially in humanities in general, there cannot be brand new, as I have already said, new inventions or revolutionary revelations, radical changes, upheavals, overturns, but only slow, gradual, gentle shifts of emphasis. Even the ideas of ancient Greek philosophers cannot be excluded. Rather, on the contrary, which cannot be said in case of exact or natural sciences. The extremely harmful damaging factor is the permanent struggle for power in science associated with the suppression of different views and opinions and with the ostracism of their supporters. This tendency has been culminating since the beginning of the 21st century and has reached, unfortunately, its peak nowadays. It's usual not to mention this fact, but I would say this problem of permanent conflict and contradiction in the academic sphere is even sharper than in the rest of society. Speaking on this basis of my own experience, I do know no harder and irreconcilable situation than that of the academic sphere. Therefore, it's very topical to stress the current significance of tolerance and mutual understanding and respect when speaking about the future perspectives of philology in general and Slavonic studies in particular. Thus, to return to the substantial question placed in the title of my modest contribution, redefining or preserving, I can only answer the following. The gradual shifts, also redefining, but very carefully, conservatively, with a gradual transition towards a wider concept, but always accompanied by redefining the boundaries of the whole complex of Slavonic studies, so that the change and the natural movement and reform might not bring more damage than benefit for the integrity of a scholarship or science which can't cease to function as an effective tool of human cognition. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for a great presentation. And once again, we can say that we share the same mood, Professor Pospíšil, yes? Telling from our perspective of Slavic studies, Polish studies in Poland, it is that we have learned after the lesson of being swallowed by cultural studies, that maybe now we would like to rather think your way, yes? So we make the redefinition, we make you know, this opening, but being a bit more bound to even literariness, although the word has been, you know, controversial for some time, and for structural traditions and things like that. Right now we have on the screen your presentation.
Yes,
so if
just 2 minutes, very quickly. Thank you very much. There are some names I mentioned so that you could see it in the original. There's sort of accompanying material for a short paper. The translation of Wallmann's book into German. There are some of my studies concerning the methodology of comparative studies and Slavonic studies as such in Russian, in English, in Czech. That's the conclusions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your idea of semi-opening in methodology, but with the great opening in the level of values. Of being tolerant, open for the other person's opinion. Professor Kraskowska, yes, raised her hand.
Yes, I have suggestions for those of us who have some presentations. Could we just put these presentations make these presentations available into in our documents on MS Teams?
It's possible to send it to Professor Feuillebois, for example.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's one possible solution,
yes,
right?
Can we? Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And now the final blow is I invite Professor Tvirtko Vukovic from Zagreb University, and his paper's title Modern Literary Criticism in Croatia: Development and Current Situation.
Okay, I eventually realized that after Professor Kirschbaum's speech, I raised a hand instead of clapping. So I'm sorry, and big congratulations to Professor again. So, distinguished professors, distinguished scholars, dear colleagues, friends, greetings again from Zagreb. First of all, I would like to thank our Poznań colleagues for their effort in gathering us around the topic of contemporary Slavic studies. Is a great idea, and I'm happy about it. And I'm going to present, as we heard, the development of modern literary criticism in Croatia. And inevitably, it will be extremely concise and schematic overview of the field. I'm sorry about that, but I'll try to introduce the main methodological and theoretical perspectives as well as institutional frameworks. Besides, I'll provide cursory insight into the situation in the field in the last 3 decades. It should be added that my presentation was conceived as a very, very loose framework for the discussion about contemporary literary criticism in the Slavic studies. So it is considered that modern Croatian literary criticism originated in the first decade after World War II, basically in the 1950s. And the rise of the field was an endeavor striving essentially for a much more scientific approach to literature. In other words, an approach to literature that is, it could be said, analytically rigorous and methodologically precise. Okay, it was in many cultures at that time a common and widespread process. As we know, literary criticism was supposed to be an autonomous scientific field detached from other disciplines such as, I don't know, history, psychology, sociology, etc. Accordingly, modern Croatian literary criticism took shape questioning methods that limit literature to some external functions, such as, I don't know, cognition of historical truth or building a cultivated man, and the like. It's not hard to conclude that in the early period of development, modern Croatian literary criticism was under the influence of, I don't know, Russian formalism, the Prague school, structural linguistics of Ferdinand de Saussure, etc. In those years, a less commonly known influence, but not less powerful, was influence of immanent critique and stylistic interpretation initiated by Emil Steiger. As you know, the basic principle of immanent critique was to describe and not to explain. That is closely related, as we know, to the formalistic approach to literary text. The formalistic approach as a description of main organizational procedures of the text. So the focus on the literary style in the papers of Croatian scholars in the 50s was basically the focus on specific characteristics of literary language. That approach was also closely related to the well-known formalistic idea created by Roman Jakobson. That's the idea that the subject of literary criticism is not literature, but literariness. I don't speak Russian, but I think it's literatureness, something like that, yeah, in Russian. Yeah. According to Croatian scholars, the particular style marks a difference between the language of literary art and the standard language of communication. And they follow the idea that literature is the art of words. I think that that expression they took from Viktor Shklovsky directly, and they pushed that idea as their maxim. So hence the name of the journal, they started in 1957. The name of the journal was Art of Words, Umjetnost riječi in Croatian. And all the time I'm referring to the leading members of the section of literary theory and methodology of literary history of Croatian Philological Society. The section was founded at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Zagreb in 1951, and it is much better known as the Zagreb School of Stylistics. And the Zagreb School of Stylistics was influential all over former Yugoslavia, especially in the 50s and the 60s. The most prominent members of the Zagreb School of Stylistics were the first editor of the journal Umjetnost riječi, Art of Words, Zdenko Škreb, professor at the Department of German Language and Literature, then Alexander Flaker, the world-renowned scholar of Russian avant-garde literature, and Ivo Frankeš, Krunoslav Pranjic, Radoslav Katičić, among others. After the initial period, the work of the members of the Zagreb School of Stylistics in the 60s and in the 70s may be characterized by their openness to the achievements of, let's say, international literary scholarship, such as, I don't know, structuralism, semiotics, reception theory, and even reader response criticism, etc. And in the 80s, a novelty in the field of literary criticism was the establishment of post-structural narratology approaches. The most influential scholar of the second generation in the field of literary and cultural theory was Vladimir Biti. He published several books and articles related to current narratological issues, such as, I don't know, fairy tales and legend, the interest of narrative text, etc. And what is more, as an interest in the postmodernism prevailed, numerous scholars in the late 80s worked in the domain of intertextuality, metatextuality, and intermediality. And the result of their endeavors was the anthology entitled Intertextuality and Intermediality, published in 1988, I think. All in all, it could be said that in the late 80s, Croatian scholars and had profound insight in the latest theories, methodologies, approaches, analytical tools, and so on. And an evident indicator of that process was an anthology entitled Contemporary Literary Theories, published in 1986 and edited by Professor of English Literature, Miroslav Becker. Okay, it wouldn't be fair not to mention analysis in the study of lyrics, drawing from Lotman's semiotics, for example, a composition of the lyric poem by Josip Užarević, as well as analysis that used the structural approach in the study of tropes and rhetoric in general, for example, a metaphor by Ante Stavac. Generally speaking, modern Croatian literary criticism in the last decade of the 20th century was marked by, let's say, interdisciplinarity. Narratology was still an important domain of scholars' interest, as well as post-structural analysis of autoreferentiality. But apart from that, the field was enriched, it could be said, by different research trends. For instance, I don't know, many scholars work in the field of autobiography studies, and accordingly, they initiated related issues such as, I don't know, the narrative construction of identity. Autobiography studies were closely related to gender and feminist problems, for example, to the interest in women's writing. Furthermore, some scholars in the domain of drama and theater studies introduced approaches akin to new historicist readings, and that was an indication of forthcoming political turn in the field. The most important contribution to the field in that decade, I'm talking about in the 90s, yes, I'm talking about the 90s, was the Dictionary of Contemporary Literary Theory by Vladimir Biti, published in 1997. The dictionary, it could be said, was a major breakthrough in the theory with the capital T in Croatian culture, and it had an extensive impact on the field of literary criticism in general. 3 years later, Biti published a second revised edition titled Dictionary of Contemporary Literary and Cultural Theory, and that designated the cultural turn in Croatian humanities and social sciences. As I have pointed out, modern Croatian literary criticism in the first decade of the new millennium was marked by two significant turns, the cultural and the ethical and political turn. The department, for example, the Department of Comparative Literature initiated the postgraduate program in cultural studies in 2002. The cultural analysis naturally focused less on literary text, but they still encouraged research in the field of literary criticism, such as the study of the literary canon formation, the creation of literary value, the relationship between high and popular literature, etc. The political turn was inherent in the cultural turn, and if I'm not mistaken, it could be said that almost every so-called theoretical turn has an echo in contemporary Croatian literary criticism. Whether the theoretical turns always give rise to meaningful results is open to debate, of course, and we heard something about that previously. Finally, it needs to be pointed out that the fundamental project of the Croatian Literary Encyclopedia was finished 10 years ago. The Miroslav Krleža Institute of Lexicography published the last volume in 2011. The encyclopedia covers every important literary phenomenon, writer, scholar, book, style, poetics from 7th to 21st century. As you can see, my presentation necessarily neglected many significant and serious research perspectives, especially those from the last 2 decades. So I just list a few: trauma, body and memory in literature, nation construction and literature, dislocation, diaspora, travel and literature, literature and emotions, literature and economy, etc., etc. However, I hope that you got at least the cursory insight in the process of the development of modern Croatian literary criticism, in spite of the inevitable rush and hence the reduction in my presentation. So yeah, thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you, dear Tvitko. Yes, what was striking me is that maybe it was the same moment when the dominance of semiotical and structural methodology was put aside in Croatia, and Poland was maybe the same. It was 90s. And Poland, it was sometimes in a kind of dramatic situation with the struggle against structuralism by the constructionists, yes. And after that, we had opened, all these gates for psychoanalysis and these cultural terms, and all the other terms that happened, yes. Thank you so much for that, because we can see also that there is some special story, history, yes, to be written, yes, about some initiatives, methodological initiatives that are maybe known in our part of research and in our part of Europe, like this stylistic school from Zagreb, yes. Yeah. I don't know if it is as widely known as it should be, yes, because maybe this is the same case as this translational school from Poznań, yes, described by Professor Kraskowska. We had just a few minutes to share some more opinions. I would maybe ask you to, because sometimes when I'm meeting scholars from Slavic departments and from Slavic universities, I realize that maybe it is true what Professor Kirschbaum said, that our contribution to literary studies, literary world studies, was mainly structuralism, yes, when from Russian formalism, then through Prague circle, the linguistic circle, and then through Bulgarian, Yugoslavian, Polish, yes, theoreticians. We had this influence, sometimes diminished, because we had these examples that not all of our inventions came out from our part of Europe and from our part of studies. just two scholars who came from Bulgaria to Paris, like Todorov and Kristeva, yes, made a revolution. What would happen with 100 of us, yes, would travel to Paris? Maybe that would be just another kind of event. But the question I would ask would be like this. Maybe there is some significant difference in how we experience all these very quick turns, like, you know, animal study turns, turn to the think studies, and turn to materiality, political turn, and others, because, and as I could see from our perspective, we accept all these changes. But when we come to the analytical work, we usually use tools that has been educated to our students and to us by our structural teachers. Yes, one of the mostly arranged, most engaged scholars in Poland who has been provoking the deconstructionist turn in Poland, Professor Markowski. He, as a teacher of poetics, he always is basing on the structural writings. Yes, and so this is like kind of two kind of paradigms, two kind of methodological thinkings in his own practice. Yes, when he has his lectures on the theory of literature, he's becoming a deconstructionist. But when he is a teacher of poetics, he's always structuralist. So my question is, maybe this is something that is typical for our studies at Slavic universities and Slavic departments, that this tradition of structural and semiotical thinking is lasting longer. Yes, is lasting longer at our departments. Do you think it is true, or maybe not? Maybe we have been completely swallowed by all these cultural terms and other terms. Yes, Eva.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a feeling, and not only now, but for the last a couple of years, that there is no other poetics but structural and semiotic poetics. So perhaps if we abandon this constant label, structuralism, semiotics, because they seem to be in a way discouraging, these labels, but speak about poetics, then perhaps the contribution, the Slavic contribution into constructing the instruments for poetical analysis will be more visible. I don't know, but Danuta Ulicka, who was the leader, or is the leader of the whole team investigating Polish theory in the whole 20th century. She presents such an opinion that there is a one paradigm, Polish, Russian, well, in general, Central Eastern European paradigm in theory, widely understood theory, and that is where the history of theory has started. The history of contemporary theory has started. So if we perhaps if we start to speak about poetics more clearly, not to distinguish it from theory, but in a way, as you said, poetics is a little bit separate. It's practical, and these tools invented by formalists and linguists and structuralists, they proved to be timeless and universal. So, because if we continue to speak about structuralism and semiotics, it is as if we live in past. If we abandon these terms, perhaps the timelessness of these methods and tools will be more visible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So your point is also that we maybe need to avoid these labels, yes, because maybe they are discouraging. But maybe we need to redefine these labels in some way, because this is kind of structural tradition, a lived tradition, yes, in the practice. Professor Ivo Pospíšil.
Excuse me, just one little thing. I fully agree with Professor with the view that really the structuralist approach or formalist approach or poetology, poetics, and so on maybe correspond more to the substance of literature as a kind of art as such. Maybe it's connected with the educational purposes she mentioned, but still I think it's the sort of literariness mentioned by Roman Jakobson and of course discussed later. I wouldn't say it's the whole complex of matters connected with studying literature, but of course if we want to transcend the borders of structural, I would say, approach. So we have in other spheres of science, in the complex of area studies I spoke about. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We can also consider, because there is some impulse that we always feel as a literary scholars from our literatures, yes, maybe the idea of literature, yes, important for our cultures is a bit different, yes, and maybe it is stimulating us, yes, to thinking in this direction, yes? So maybe another thing to consider. Professor Witkowski.
Yes, please allow me to ask a slightly different question. Because when I was listening to the presentation of Victoire, there was one question that was born in my mind, and I would like to ask Victoire now, if possible, are you still with us, Victoire? Okay.
It's possible she has left. Yes.
Because I can see her. Okay, right. Yeah. So maybe later on, I simply wanted to ask her a question. Who is right now interested in Slavic studies in France? Are people of Slavic origin, the sons of the migrants, or this is the generation of the French nationals who are interested in the Slavic languages? But I suppose I will have to do it in the other occasion. So I'm sorry, I withdraw my question and before I have to give back voice to Tomasz. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe the good moment for this question would be our round table in the afternoon, dear rector. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Yes. Because yes, I cannot see Victoire. Maybe she has disappeared, but maybe she has lost her blessing. Yes. So now maybe she cannot speak.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Is another one who would like to add some comment?
I just wanted to say, if it's possible, that Victoire wrote me before that she has different obligations and she will have to go earlier. So I think it was this moment, and she apologized for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Dear distinguished scholar, dear friends, if we do not have any other remarks and more comments, I would say that that I have a great hope that what have been presented here will be developed in a paper in each case, so as we could publish an important book about the state of methodological thinking, yes, in Slavic departments and in Slavic universities, because however we would see it, it reveals our perspective, which is different, yes, to the perspective of the usual, American or another Western languages and literatures and universities, with its different tradition and different reading, yes, of today's market of new methodologies, yes, because we are living in the same, same environment, yes, of these quick changes. But I think that we adapted them in a different way. Yes, we have our new ways of adapting these terms and this changes. I remember this canonical paper by Jan Mukarzowski, when he has been describing how the influence of different literatures on Czech literature has been experienced, and he had maybe the main experience in the 19th century was French or German, but this hierarchy, yes, has been established by the French writers. Yes, so this is the example, yes, of this. Initiativeness, yes, that is always on our side, yes, and I think that all the papers presented here at this methodological panel has presented at least this very important moment, that we adopt some of these new methodologies, that we are part of it, but on our own terms, yes, using our own traditions, having in mind our own schools, yes, not known abroad. Sometimes I would even say that we with bigger and bigger eagerness, yes, to speak the same voice, yes, from Zagreb, from Brno, from Slavic department in Freiburg, yes, from Poznań and other places that met today. This is very precious for me. Twitko knows that this is my thing of my interest, yes, of last time, yes. How is it working? Yes, do we have this lived tradition of structuralism and semiotics? And I think that this is one more example, yes, Twitko, yes, that there is something to be discussed, there is something to be revealed, yes, something to be revived, maybe as well. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I'm not certain that we can talk about unified field today. When we talk about Slavic studies, especially literary criticism in Slavic studies, we can talk about unified field, unified methodology, or unified, I don't know, approach. But yes, as you said, we should preserve our tradition and use it on our own terms. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I fully agree. We do not think that there is a unified field, but there is some special kind of reception, yes, and discussing, yes, new terms, new ideas, that is making us thinking a bit closer, yes, in a closer way, that because this strong tradition of structural and semiotical thinking, we are adapting new methodologies in a bit different way, yes, than the universities in France and Great Britain or in American universities.
Yeah,
okay.
We can use another ideas, for example, as transgression, having in mind Bakhtin's ideas. Bakhtin is a very important thinker from a Slavic world, and we can use, as Rita Felsky recently reminded us of necessity of constant transit, transfer, traffic of ideas, and so on across a new context. We can use, for example, transgression as idea to improve our field, to to try something new from old stuff, Yeah. As Professor Pospíšil said,
Yes, I fully agree. And because Agata has appeared on the screen before a moment, it is because she is controlling me with her remote control. I can see that this is the moment when I have to warmly thank all the participants of this panel and to express my great gratitude to our rector Rafał Witkowski, who has stayed with us for all this discussion and being with us in this initiative. Thank you all the guests that has been listening to the papers, and I am very grateful to Agata that allowed us, and supported and was a IT support for all of us. So as we could meet now living and staying in our places all over Europe, but hoping, that one day we will travel to the same university and continue our project of traveling through other words with Slavic Studies department. Okay, so maybe this is a good moment to ask Agata for more instructions. How to live today our day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this inspiring and really great discussion. It was a huge pleasure to listen. And now we have some time to rest. I think resting is a good modus vivendi. And we'll meet at 1:30 for these 3 sessions, which will be parallel. So see you next 2 hours. And thank you very much again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
bye.
You.
Bye.